Joining me now is Jake Wallis, Simon's editor of the Jewish Chronicle. Good afternoon, Jake. Thanks for joining me.
Hi.
Does it concern you how swiftly President Biden goes from criticising Israel on one hand to then pledging his undying support for them?
Yes, I mean it does concern me. I mean the criticism that he's been leveling against Israel has been really alarming and unprecedented over recent weeks, because ultimately nothing has really changed. You know, Hamas committed those atrocities on October the 7th, signing its own death warrant, or that should have been the case. Israel then had the job of destroying Hamas while limiting civilian casualties, which it proceeded to do. But over the months that ensued, international pressure, informed by Hamas propaganda, became very great, and President Biden's own domestic political needs became urgent. And so he began to issue this aggressive rhetoric towards Israel, which was then taken up by other Democrats in his party. But the facts hadn't changed. But now, you know, it's welcome that he's finally come to his senses when seeing that Israel is under existential threat once again from the Iranians. And so one can only hope that President Biden begins to come to his senses and align his rhetoric with his policy, and indeed with the preference of 80% of the American public who stand behind Israel in this conflict.
So, with the fact that the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, he used a speech to warn Israel after they attacked the Iranian consulates. Do you not think that Biden should perhaps be trying to de-escalate the situation? I feel by him coming out so resolutely to stand with Israel, that's only going to cause more conflict.
I think you're, I'm afraid, falling into a grave misunderstanding of what's going on now and what has been going on between Iran and its neighbors over the last few years. Since Biden came to power, he has tried to reheat the nuclear deal by negotiations with Iran. Don't forget, Donald Trump pulled out of that deal, which was Obama's deal when he was in power. And Biden has presided over years and years of appeasement of Iran. These negotiations that he's been carrying out ran into nothing. The Iranians strung him along and at the same time pursued progress towards a bomb. They've now got enough uranium for one bomb and just working on the weaponization of that. They've embedded their proxy forces and armed them around the region, and have increased their power in that regard. They've used the sanctions money which the Americans have unfrozen, allowed them to have, to bolster their forces around the region. And they're getting themselves into a position where they can destroy Israel and herald what they want, which is an apocalyptic war. This is a fanatical regime driven by a theology which sees an apocalyptic war as the way to herald messianic times. They want to fulfill a prophecy which sees the return of a figure called the Mahdi, an invisible figure which will come into the real world once an apocalyptic war is sparked. That's what they want. That's what they're going for. We need to wise up to that, and seeking to not respond to their sort of progression towards World War III is only to make it worse when it finally comes. Biden would have done much better to have enforced a policy of deterrent from the beginning, rather than waiting until now, after years and years of appeasement, to finally deal with it when the Iranians begin to reveal the true extent of their plans. And let me tell you, if they come for Israel, they're coming for us too. You know, Iran is a major security threat on British shores. There were 15 assassination attempts that were foiled by MI5 last year, and about 10 the year before. An Iranian dissident journalist was stabbed in West London just a couple of weeks ago in a warning from the Iranian regime. And one security official told me quite recently that Iran was the threat that keeps him up at night above all else on our shores in Britain. This is a global menace and a global threat. And the sooner we begin to get tough and deter it rather than appease it, the better.
Well, Jake, I want to ask you about the Israeli foreign minister's comments on social media. And these are the foreign minister's comments, not the defense minister, so maybe not to be taken as seriously. But he said, if Iran attacks from its territory, Israel will react and attack in Iran. But that word territory, we know they have these factions, Hezbollah, the Houthis, who have been continuously firing missiles across to Israel already. If one of those groups, one of those factions were to attack Israel or continue to attack, does this not give Iran a way out to say, well, you said from our territory, and actually this wasn't from our territory, this was from Yemen or somewhere else instead, or from the Lebanon border?
Yeah, I mean, this is the game that Iran has been playing for many years. So while pursuing its own buildup of power, nuclear power and ballistic missiles, it's also been funding and supporting and directing proxies, as you've mentioned, throughout the region, from Hezbollah to the Houthis to militia in Iraq and in Syria. And that has allowed it plausible deniability to be able to direct attacks from foreign countries using its proxy militia and therefore avoid retaliation. Now, the Israeli defense apparatus has been split in terms of its doctrine to respond to Iran in that way. Under Naftali Bennett, the former prime minister, there was this octopus idea that you hit the head of the octopus, not the tentacles. And during that period, there were lots of Mossad operations on Iranian soil itself. But Netanyahu seems to have gone back to striking the tentacles more than the head of the octopus, as it were. But in my view, and in the view of many in the defense establishment, both in Israel, in the States, and here in Britain, Iran needs to be deterred sooner or later, and it only really will be deterred by strikes on Iranian soil. The joint Western power is far, far greater than Iranian power, and we need to realize that and start to flex our muscles a little bit. Now, I'm not saying that we should willfully go into full-scale war with Iran. Nobody wants war. But the only way to avoid a full-scale war is by preventing the buildup of the Iranian threat, by mounting an effective deterrent. Without that, all you have is appeasement. And that includes, unfortunately, responding only to the proxies and allowing Iran to get away with this clear dodge. The longer we do that, the worse the problem will get, and the greater the chances of a proper full-scale war. So we need to grasp the mettle and enforce deterrent before it's too late.
Jake, one more question for you. The IDF is constructing a northern crossing in Gaza to allow more aid to enter the enclave. It's going to increase from 350 trucks a day to around 500 a day eventually. But how hard must it be for the IDF to know that getting all this aid into Gaza, which is desperately needed by the civilians, is going to also then nourish the terrorists who are hiding amongst them?
I mean, look, this is one of the many impossible dilemmas that Israel faces. You know, an Israeli officer said recently that in all the Hamas terrorists that he had seen captured and killed, there wasn't one single one that looked in any way hungry. So the aid is getting in, but it's getting mainly or primarily to Hamas. And this is a real problem. You know, Israel, there are voices in Israel that say, look, we're at war. Let's not send in very much aid because our objective is to beat Hamas. And by sending in aid, we are obstructing our own objectives. But the main Israeli principle is not to harm civilians. And so to feed them is part of that. And yet it's become this great political issue, both in Israel and with pressure from the outside. You know, people, armchair critics sitting here in Britain who don't have children on the front line, who don't live in places that would be bombed by Hamas if they could, are very easily able to say, look, let's just have a ceasefire, send them the aid, and let's just be nice. But unfortunately, whenever being nice has been tried in the past, it has ended up with a massacre of Jews. And so Israel needs to defend itself. And obviously, you know, personally, I want to see Gazans well-fed, well-cared for in a prosperous, safe and secure country. They had the opportunity to build that country in 2005 when Israel withdrew and gave them the keys. Unfortunately, then there was a Hamas coup and takeover, and the rest is history. So Israel does find itself in a very difficult position. And yet ultimately, Israel does need to deliver a lot of aid into Gaza because that is the main issue that's preoccupying the United States, with good reason. And United States support is essential for Israel to continue to prosecute the war, if it can do, which I think it should be able to do so in order to destroy Hamas and win the peace.
Jake, Wallis, Simons, thank you for your time.